Welcome to the Everyday Ministry Podcast, where ministers get together to discuss everyday ministry.
This is James, and I'm sitting here with Daniel M., and I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Yeah, you are. You got it. You're a rock star.
Apparently, there's a professional golf player with the same name.
There sure is. And we're the same age, and we're both Korean. It's awesome. I wish I could golf like him.
Aren't you from Canada?
Yes, I am. He's from California.
Okay, so you're not both from Canada, at least.
No.
I would make fun of Canada, but on your podcast, I think Ed Stetzer does a good enough job of that. So
he does. I let him do it because his wife is Canadian, so it's acceptable.
That's right. The other guy on the podcast actually visited Canada for the first time, I guess, a few months back. I don't know where they went. I just know he went to Canada.
Where does he live?
He lives in Alabama.
Okay, I mean that's a big trek. So I live in Tennessee. I live in Nashville, and we will drive, like we drove to Ontario, which is where my wife's family is at. And that's like above the state of New York, that end of the country. So when we told our neighbor who grew up in Tennessee all his life and he has kids and all that, and when we told him that we were driving to Canada, he was like, man, I almost threw up. And I'm like, dude, it's not that far away. To go to Ontario, it's like 12 to 15 hours.
That's not that bad.
Yeah, you can't drive to where I'm from, which is Vancouver. That's like 24, 30 hours or something like that. So
I actually came through Nashville this weekend. I went to Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay, yeah.
To visit family over the weekend and drove right around Nashville and right through it, and I didn't stop at all. So, but Daniel, if you would, just introduce yourself to the listeners. They may not know who you are, and then kind of explain, what your job is at Lifeway Leadership.
Sure. So I've been married for 11 years to my beautiful bride, Christina. We met on a mission trip during college. So that was what a great place. I'll often tell my single people who are single, I'm like, hey, if you want to meet someone who you really connect with, do it while, don't just go on a mission trip because you want to meet someone, but do it while you're doing something that you're passionate about. Right. And I'm passionate about the gospel. I'm passionate about the lost coming to know Christ. And she is too. And we met on a mission trip. So that's just a little plug there. But we met probably 13 years ago, been married, just celebrated our 11th year. And we have 3 kids. Victoria is my eldest. She's about to turn 8. Adeline is 6.5. And my son, Makarios, I know you're a seminary student, so maybe you can tell me what that means in Greek.
Nope.
But he's 3.
I'm taking Hebrew right now.
Oh, you are? Okay. So Makarios means blessed in Greek. And when I was in seminary studying the Sermon on the Mount, and all the Beatitudes it's Makarioi, because blessed is plural in the Greek. And, I was like, man, if I ever have a son, I love that. But Makarios is a little bit more proper than Makarioi. I guess both, he's going to have, a bit of an identity crisis later on. But, hey, his name means blessed, so it's great. So, yeah, we got that. That's my family. And we moved down to Nashville about 3 years ago to really start what Lifeway is now doing when it comes to church planting, multi-site, and multiplication. So up until today, I'm Canadian, born and raised in Canada. Lifeway doesn't really have much of a presence there. So even when, and I didn't grow up SBC either. So when I came down to the States to begin what Lifeway was going to do when it came to church planting, multi-site, and multiplication, it's called newchurches.com. It was really coming to this opportunity to serve the church, right? And Lifeway's mission is to serve the church in our mission of making disciples. So, I was so passionate about that. Lifeway just so believed in me and in this idea of resourcing church planting, multi-site, and multiplication. So right now I serve also so I'm full-time at Lifeway doing that on the Lifeway leadership team. We have a conference called myleadershippipeline.com. So it's all about pipeline leadership development. We also have a platform called Ministry Grid, which is all about leadership development for the church. So that's all the stuff that I do here at Lifeway. And I mean, I'm a pastor, and I'm called to the ministry. That's a huge passion for me. So when I came down to Lifeway, a lot of my mentors and people who really who I trust in and ask for advice and all that from, they're like, so what are you doing? I thought you're a pastor. I thought this is the calling that God has placed on your heart. And I'm like, man, I am. I don't know what the Lord is doing, but I know the Lord's leading us this way. Right, to serve the church in this way, to serve pastors in this way. So we just joined our local church, decided to be the type of members we always wanted. And we did the membership class, and then we joined a small group, and then the small group leaders left, and the pastor was like, can you lead this for us? And then he's like, can you share your testimony for us on Sunday? I was like, sure. And can you preach for us? And I was like, sure. And he just kept on asking. The campus pastor, the elders of the church kept on asking if I could preach. And eventually they're like, hey, can you just be one of our teaching pastors? So I serve bivocationally as a teaching pastor at my church. I'm probably preaching about every other week. So at both of our campuses. So I love that. I love how I can still be doing that. I mean, James, the bivocational life. And I mean, I love that I can still be serving the church in this way while serving pastors and church leaders.
That's awesome, man. I think you just knocked out about half the questions I was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay though. Well, as I was telling you beforehand, I'm at a church where I come in after it was planted, and so it's a different dynamic. I'm not a church planter, but it's not really an established church, and that's how I got hooked up with. I don't even know where I found y'all's podcast and all that from, but I've used a lot of y'all's resources. And
cool.
And the month that we're releasing this episode will actually be a month focused on church planning. And so I think it's going to be like 7 episodes in all. About 3 or 4 of them are church planners. One was a church plant that was not successful in the sense that it did not sustain itself. Then ones are the guy over church planning in Alabama for our Alabama Baptists. And so that's how I sent you an email. I was like, it'd be cool to get him on here and kind of talk about the resources they provide for these guys. And but what I found about y'all's podcast is that so much of the stuff that you talk about and you present this information, it could go to pastors as well. I know it's geared towards church planning, or multi-site, but it could go to anybody that's serving in a church. But the first question I always ask our guests on here is what I want to ask you is, how would you define an everyday minister?
So we talk about the priesthood of all believers, right? You look at Ephesians 4 and you talk about, you look at, hey, our role is not to do the work of ministry. It's to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Mm-hmm. So I'd really focus in on that Ephesians 4 passage and wrestle through that as it relates to an everyday minister, because in light of that, it's actually not the paid professional that is the minister, right? It's actually all of us. So there's this funny story. When I was pastoring in Korea, one of our students, the students came up to me and he was like, hey, can I catch you for coffee? Can I talk with you? Because I feel like God's calling me to the ministry. And I was like, yeah, great. Let's talk about it. And so when we met, I was like, okay, so why do you feel God's calling you to be a full-time pastor? Right. And I articulated it that way. And then his response to me was, what? Pastor? No, that's way too easy. Way too easy. I want to be a missionary. And that's how our conversation started. I was like, okay, dude, we got to roll back. We got to roll back and really get to the, open up the Bible and talk about we are all called, right? We are all called to be we're all called to be everyday ministers. But I would even take it a little bit further and say we're all called to be missionaries, right? Wherever we are, in whatever we are doing, to whoever we are called to, our primary vocation is not what we do to get a paycheck.
That's right.
Our primary vocation is to make disciples of all nations. Mm-hmm. Our secondary vocation is what we do to get a paycheck,
That's right.
Right. And sometimes for people who are in full-time vocational ministry, their primary and their secondary callings match up, but they're not better. I mean, at the foot of the cross, the level is plain.
That's right.
Right. So that's how I define.
Man,
it.
I love your answer. And I think, like you're talking about Ephesians 4, that's really the heart of what we're wanting to do here. Because so often I think when people think of a minister, they think of that pastor or youth pastor or worship leader standing before the crowds, but it's everybody. We're all called to go there for. And so I love that, because that's our desire, is to help, the vocational minister, but also change this mindset that it's just vocational ministers that are ministers. So tell us a little bit. I know you've introduced yourself and all of that, but you said you're just helping with your church now and serving in different ways. But tell us a little bit about your past ministry experience. I think you've done a variety of things, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. So I started out after college. I was interning at a church plant. And after that, I was in Montreal doing student ministry at a church plant, help them go to their second campus and start that up. And after that, I was in Korea for a couple of years. I was doing leadership and volunteer development for the English ministry within this mega church in Korea. I guess you'd call it a giga church in Korea. So it was within the English ministry, and I was doing leadership development, volunteer development, and also I was running a multi-campus student ministry there. Mm-hmm. And then that's when, after that, we had our firstborn in Korea, and then ended up moving back to Canada, which is where I was born and raised in Vancouver, and actually began pastoring up in Montreal, doing adult ministries within a multi-site church. So it was adult ministries as well as doing multi-site stuff with them. So I grew up my entire life in a church plant, and I've always been in either a church plant or a multi-site type of situation, right? So it's just living in both worlds. The thing that comes to me is, hey, I know there's some people who are like, no, it's only church planting, and other people are, no, multi-site is more effective. And for me, it's like, hey, it's about multiplication. Yeah. Right. It's about multiplication. The way that you do it, hey, you can be a either or, you can be a both and. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, are you making disciples that are making disciples? That's right. Right. So whether they're worshiping in a campus or they're worshiping in a brand new church, it's more about multiplication for me and reaching the lost.
Okay. So at Lifeway, you're over the new churches and all of that. If you want to, just take an opportunity and just explain a lot of the resources y'all provide on your end of it all.
Yeah. So Lifeway is big, and I didn't realize how big they were until I moved to the States. I mean, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. So, I mean, I'm a teaching pastor at a SBC church now, but Lifeway, what was really neat though, is Lifeway being a Southern Baptist entity. I didn't realize that Lifeway actually serves more non-Southern Baptists than Southern Baptists.
Really?
Yeah. So the really neat thing about Lifeway is we're focusing in on resources. So small group material, Bible study material, Bibles, right? The Christian Standard Bible, leadership development groups, all this stuff. And really our focus is everyone. Yeah. Right. And hey, how can we just resource them in a trustworthy manner? Right. So everything that we do is really within this frame of trustworthy content, biblical content. So when I came, it was really a matter of saying, hey, Lifeway doesn't do anything to resource church planting, multi-site, or multiplication. So if you go to newchurches.com, that's what we started 2 years ago. And that site is all, you're right, James. I appreciate how you said the podcast it's not just for church planters or multi-site churches, because we talk about church practice, development, growth, leadership development, and all that. But that site contains really, it's we have a podcast, we have a membership site, we have courses. Like if you're discerning or maybe trying to figure out, are you called to be a church planter? You go to newchurches.com/essential church planting. And there's an 18 module course that Ed Stetzer and I did with our friends. And so there's a lot of courses like that. Actually, you, James, being a bivocational guy, we just brought Hugh Halter in, and we just filmed out a bivocational course.
Yeah.
right? Not just bivocational church planting, but bivocational ministry. So a lot of what we're doing is we're creating courses and material that will just really help the church, help church leaders, right? So that's kind of the main hat that I wear. But if you go to myleadershippipeline.com and also ministrygrid.com, those two are additional. That's all part of the Lifeway leadership family, right? Because everything that we do is focused on church leaders. So Ministry Grid is our platform, or actually, by the time this podcast goes live, our new version of Ministry Grid should be coming out or should be live. And we rehauled that from the ground up, where you can build training with your thumbs and take training with your thumbs. Like, it's mobile first, super fast.
Really?
Like, it's just, it's insane. And so I've been kind of leading the charge on developing that. I mean, I don't know how to code, but, developing it from the sense of, hey, I'm a pastor. What would be super easy for congregants? What would I want? So really coming in from that side. So that's Ministry Grid and Lifeway Leadership, the pipeline stuff. That website, myleadershippipeline.com, is our conference. And we do a lot of events and coaching, consulting, and conferences around just developing a leadership pipeline.
I remember early, I guess right after my the Ministry Grid come out, I was looking at it, and y'all had resources from parking lot, helping the parking lot attendants to the pastor to everything in between. And so I respect that. It covers the little things that people don't think about all the time, and it covers the big things that almost get overwhelmed. I want to recommend this highly to those listening, because a lot of our listeners are actually, like bivocational ministers, but also some of them don't have a lot of educational background, and something like this is easy for you to do, like he said, and the new one's releasing. And so, man, y'all go check it out. I'm going to put all of these on the show notes so you can go to the websites and check them out. So I want to take a minute and just let you tell us about the podcast specifically, because that's kind of how I got introduced to it. And I know it's weird as a podcast recommending another one, but
no, that's the best way. That's how I learn about new podcasts. It's by listening to podcasts, recommend other ones. So
that's right.
It's a good deal, bro.
All right, so tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so the New Churches podcast, our vision when we started it up, and it's about 2 years old, and it's cool because we're almost at about 500,000 downloads. So it's really neat to see the number of people that are just enjoying it. And it's funny because I'll go to conferences or meet people who listen to the podcast, and there are some people who've binge listened, and we're in a binge kind of culture, Netflix and all that, but a lot of people who will binge listen from the beginning, and others will just kind of select questions, right? So each of our episodes are about 10 to 15 minutes long. And really the idea with the podcast is every one of them have a question. There's a question behind them. Right. So someone has left a voicemail for us, and all your listeners can actually go on newchurches.com and click the sidebar that says voicemail, leave a voicemail, and they can send a question in. And that question we actually play on the podcast. We play it on the podcast, and then we talk about it. So the one that came out on September 7th was on leadership pipeline and your discipleship pathway, right? Todd Adkins is the director of leadership at Lifeway, and he's talking about leadership development, right? He has a book called Developing Your Leadership Pipeline. And then Discipleship Pathway is what my book, No Silver Bullets, is about. And I talk about that side of things. So we go back and forth there. Episode 210 was how do you prevent burnout for volunteers? Episode 209 is small group training. And so, we really talk about tangible, practical questions and really hit at it. So what happens is we release 2 episodes a week. One of the episodes is Ed Stetzer and myself, answering one of the questions, and the other one is Todd Adkins and me. Okay. So let me ask you, James, what do you like better? Do you like it when Ed's on or when Todd's on?
I'm not answering.
When Daniel's not on, right?
I'll say it seems like generally when Ed is on, it's more the church planning side. Yeah. And when Todd's on, it's more the multi-site. Yeah. So for me, the one with Ed's more beneficial a lot of times. You want to tell us about episode 100?
No, you can listen to episode 200.
It was good. I want to recommend listening, everybody listening, if you pick one and you want to try that one out, listen to, I think it was, you say 209 about the burnout for volunteers.
Yeah.
I really,
Episode 210 is burnout
210.
for volunteers. Yeah.
210.
Did you
I
like that one?
enjoyed that one. Because, so often we talk about burnout of the pastor and, or the leaders and all that, but volunteers, it's just as easy for them to get burned out at times.
Yeah. And I love our format because there's no way that I can come up with this nuanced of a question.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's so cool to see our listeners continuing to submit questions and just being able to serve the church in this way.
I get amazed how long some of these people are able to record a question. Because don't you have like a 5-second limit or something like that?
45 seconds.
Yeah. Some of the questions somehow end up being 2 minutes, but
there's a workaround. I don't want to share what it is, but there's a workaround. But sometimes we just don't play those people's questions. So
I understand. We're gonna kind of get towards the end of the podcast. I don't want to take up too much of your time. But if you would just take a minute, and I want you to tell everybody about your book and just kind of how they can find the book, how they can purchase it. Obviously, they could probably go to Lifeway and purchase it, but tell us a little bit about it and how they can get their hands on it. And you don't have to go in detail because I want them to be able to buy the book. So
yeah. Well, so this is I rewrote Planting Missional Churches with Ed Stetzer, the second edition. So that came out last year, and I mean, honestly, who knows more about church planting than Ed Stetzer? So when he was like, let's rewrite this together, I was like, what do you want? What are you talking about? So what I did with Planting Missional Churches is I added systems, leadership development, more that end of things. And when I came around and began writing No Silver Bullets, it was really focusing on discipleship from a systems perspective. Right. It was really this idea of, hey, so often, I mean, we have our mentors, we have our models, we have those we respect and follow and kind of pattern our ministries after. And so often all we do is copy their models. Right. We read a book and we're like, oh, well, if it worked for them, it should work for me. Or we go to a conference or listen to one, we stream one and it's like, oh, okay, if I just do A, B, C, and D, then, this is going to result. And sometimes it does. Other times we read another book or go to another conference and switch and go to that model instead. So it's so easy to go from one model to the next to this. So the beauty of what I talk about in my book is that there are no silver bullets.
Yeah.
Right. There are no one decision solutions that are going to fix all your issues and all your problems, but there are small shifts that you can make that will produce large change. Right. So what I do in the first chapter is I talk about discipleship from a systems perspective. And I'm like, hey, are you a copycat church? Are you a silver bullet church? Are you a hippie church? Are you an intentional church? Right. And I give a matrix and some audits and an assessment for you to really identify where you're at and how you view discipleship. And then the second chapter, I talk about the idea of moving from an output goal idea of maturity to an input goal. So, man, there's some research in that chapter that's super relevant to everyone. Now, I know I lead new churches and we talked a lot about church planning, multi-site, but this book is really about discipleship for everyone, for every church. So that second chapter, whether you're a lay leader, a discipler, or a pastor, that second chapter is, I mean, there's some discipleship research that I had the ability to access and really dig deeper into. It's based on two massive research projects, probably the largest that's been done in North America. And it's really cool to see some of the patterns and what actually truly does lead to maturity in an individual's life. Right. So then we move there to a few other different topics. So I really outlined those 5 shifts. And then the second half of the book, I talk about how do you introduce change. So the president of Lifeway, Tom Rainer, he came out with a book, Who Moved My Pulpit, last year. Mm-hmm. And it's all about leading change. So I reference that, but I talk about, hey, how do you actually just introduce change? His book does a really great job at how do you, tip to tail lead change. But I'm really just talking about how do you just even figure out if you want to introduce change or not?
Yeah.
right? Because you're going to read these shifts and you're like, okay, well, how can I actually implement them? So that's what that chapter's about. I then talk about vision, strategy, and values. And I know it's honestly, there's so many questions, especially those who are new in ministry or leading a church for the first time. And they're like, so what's the difference between vision and mission? Okay, what is a ministry plan? How do we actually outline strategy? What does it mean to have values in a church? So I really simplify that and say, hey, actually, when you have your vision, I'll just, really quickly, the vision of your church, the vision of every church, I don't care how you word it, but the vision of every church should be a contextualized version of the Great Commission and Great Commandment.
That's right.
Right? That's Jesus's mission. So you can word it the way you want. I really don't care, but that should be the vision. But honestly, how you get to the vision is your strategy. And your strategy it's really everything a church does, whether you're small or large or in between. And no matter, even if you're a house church or a mega church or cowboy church or whatever, right? I mean, honestly, it's everything a church does strategy-wise fall into two categories: your leadership pipeline and your discipleship pathway. Your leadership pipeline is how you equip the saints for the work of ministry, and your discipleship pathway is how you mature them.
That's right.
Right. So my book really focuses on how to develop your discipleship pathway. Right. There's a book that Eric Geiger and Kevin Peck put out, Designed to Lead. That book focuses on your leadership pipeline. Yeah. Right. And then your values are what dictate how you do your strategy, different than the one from the church down the road. And then the last chapter is how do you actually develop a discipleship pathway. So that's a quick nutshell. I didn't go through the 5 shifts, but that's a bit about what the book is about.
Man, it sounds good. I'm at the buy it and read it during a break. I'm reading about 10 books right now in the middle of the semester. So I have to get it and read it during Thanksgiving or in December or something. Good deal.
And you can get that anywhere books are sold. But if you go to danielm.com/no-silver-bullets, that page, there's a ton there about the book, and you can actually order through a bunch of different links there. So,
okay, all right. Well, I wanted this one. I didn't kind of tell you beforehand, but I want to ask you one more question.
Yeah.
Just for the simple fact of being church planning month for us, give one advice to church planners out there.
So to people who are church planters or who are thinking about church planting?
Do both.
Okay. So if you're thinking and discerning about church planting, all right, the number one thing I want to say is, seek the Lord, lay this before, ask of him. And if the Lord does call you to plant, and I believe a call to plant, every church planter is called to be a pastor, but not every pastor is called to be a church planter.
That's right.
But we are all called to be about church planting. Right? Whether or not you're called to be the church planter or not, we're all called to be about church planting, because the Great Commission, necessitates church planting. That's right. All right. So that's the number one thing. So if you feel called to be a church planter, the call to plant doesn't necessarily mean now. Right? You can't mix up the call with timing, because everything in our culture is about instant.
Yeah.
And we've been conditioned for the instant. And I talk about that in my book, but we've been conditioned for the instant. We've been conditioned for that silver bullet. Right? But God may call you, but it may be later. So bring that before the Lord and pray about that timing. If you are a church planter, then number one thing is, hey, don't, and I heard another pastor say this, don't compare someone else's highlight reels with your behind the scenes. Right? God has called you to be faithful where you're at. There's a difference between faithfulness and fruitfulness. Right? You can do something about being faithful, right? And the Lord is the one who's going to produce the fruit, 1 Corinthians 3.
That's right. So
don't compare your ministry with the one down the road, right? Because ultimately you're not answering to them. You're answering to our Lord and Savior. So,
well, you hear stories of missionaries that go to places, or church planners that go 10s and 15s and 20 years without a single convert, and then eventually someone comes to Christ. And so you can't base it off numbers or anything like that. It's just like you say, being faithful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, one way we always end the podcast is a plug of the week.
Okay.
And so, what is some resources you want to recommend? I don't think you have to recommend any that you already mentioned. It could be a book, a podcast. It could be music. It could be anything.
So something to recommend. Okay, so there's this app that I use. It's called ICG Training. ICG Training. So it's a cycling, like a spinning, at the gym, there are those spin bikes.
Mhm.
So they're spin bikes. And if you've never done a spin class, that's where you have a ton of people and they're on these bikes and you go high intensity. Orange Theory Fitness is really popular.
Yeah.
And there's that. I've done those a couple times and I really liked it. It was but it was an hour. And I'm like, I wish I had an hour to work out. I probably should have an hour to work out, but I just don't. And I don't know how I can make that. I can do 30 minutes, right? I could do 30 minutes on the bike, but an hour, I mean, it was painful. So I downloaded that app. And what's really cool is it actually connects with those those cycling bikes, and it'll be kind of your trainer for you. So it'll say, hey, go at this speed, at this intensity, and now go to this one and this one and this one. And if I just go to the gym and work out, I don't push myself hard enough and I don't get to where I need to be. But if I use that app or apps like that, it's really cool because that kind of it's like a subtle motivation that gets me there. So
awesome. Our recommendation plug of the week is going to be everything that he named in this podcast. And I know that seems easy to do, but y'all go check it out. I've enjoyed it. I've used stuff off of all of the things that he mentioned, and not completely because I just don't have the time to use all of it, but I've used a lot of it. I recommend y'all go check it out if you're able to. But Daniel, before we get out of here, you got any last words you want to say? And then also tell everybody how they can get in contact with you if they want to.
Yeah. So you can go to danielim.com. That's danielim.com. And there are links there for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff. So to list each of those would probably take too long. So just go to danielim.com. Now, in terms of a last word, honestly, so I dedicated my book. If you open up the first couple of pages, there's the kind of a sentence, 2 sentences. And this is what I said, and this is what I want to end with. To pastors and church leaders everywhere, you are the true heroes. Thanks for sticking with it. Let's finish well. And that's what I want to kind of leave with. I want us to finish well. There are too many stories of pastoral burnouts, failures, and that breaks my heart. Right. And I'll pray for those, and I pray for those people. But it's just, I don't want the enemy to win. Right. And we need to be praying for one another. It's not about a burst of energy, not about this, it's about being there for the long haul. Right. And I really want us to finish well. So I'm grateful for your podcast, James. I'm grateful for your ministry and for the investment that you have on these pastors. So let's finish well.
Well, guys, I hope y'all have enjoyed the podcast as much as I have. I just want to encourage you, as Daniel has at the end of this. I think of Paul's wording. He says that I have fought the good fight and I've ran the race. And that's a prayer for my life, is at the end of my life, I can say the same. And I know looking back at my life, it's not a long life yet, but I can see that there's times that I can't say that. And so my prayer for you listening, that's your desire, that you give it all that you can in ministry and you trust in God in it. One thing I want to end with is don't exactly remember how you said it, but you pointed out that all you can do as a pastor is be faithful, and God will bring the fruit. And that's what we see. The work that you're working in as pastors or lay leaders or members of a church, ultimately God is the one that does that work. So stay faithful.
Welcome to the Everyday Ministry Podcast, where ministers get together to discuss everyday ministry.